Right now on Upfront.
Trump indicted.
This is a persecution of a political opponent.
Former President Donald Trump accused of a criminal conspiracy to steal the 2020 election. Wisconsin prominent in the new sweeping indictment.
Anybody who was involved in the attempt to commit crimes to overthrow the American government needs to be held accountable.
Now, new questions about Wisconsin's Republican electors. This Sunday, Democratic Attorney General Josh Kaul, Republican Congressman Brian Stile.
The vice president in Wisconsin.
So it is good to be back in Wisconsin. Hello, everyone.
The first stop in the 2024 cycle, the private fundraisers, and now one of the hosts, Alex Lasry, is here. New insight from inside from the former Bucks executive and Democratic U.S. Senate candidate.
Immediate action.
And return this court to the national reputation that it once enjoyed.
The new liberal majority at the state Supreme Court, the new lawsuit challenging the legislative maps, and the court's new behind-the-scenes drama already unfolding. J.R. Ross with the new reporting is here.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. A lot to get to. We begin with former President Donald Trump indicted, appearing in federal court on charges he conspired to remain in office after losing the 2020 election.
Wisconsin prominent in the federal indictment. All of this as Trump continues to lead in the latest primary polls and just 2 weeks ahead of the first Republican primary debate in Milwaukee.
The new federal indictment calls it the Wisconsin Memo, a plan crafted by Trump attorney Kenneth Chesebro just as the presidential recounts were getting underway in Milwaukee and Dane counties.
On the motion, Commissioner Bucks.
Prosecutors say Chesebro first sent the plan to Jim Troupis, the Trump campaign attorney in Wisconsin overseeing the recounts, who appeared on Upfront in December 2020.
Do you acknowledge that Joe Biden won the election?
No.
The goal, prosecutors say, from the top levels of the Trump campaign to Trump himself expanded to get Republican electors in 7 states to submit false paperwork and deliver it to Vice President Mike Pence on January 6th to upend Congress's certification of the results for Joe Biden. I'm curious, in those moments on that day, were you aware of that plan?
I was not aware of any plan to present alternate electors.
Federal prosecutors outlining the attempt to deliver Wisconsin and Michigan's electors to the vice president through an unnamed senator, which ultimately didn't happen. That senator, Wisconsin Republican Ron Johnson.
I had nothing to do with the alternate slate. I had no idea that anybody was going to ask me to deliver those. My involvement in that attempt to deliver spanned the course of a couple seconds.
Now, pressure from some Democrats for Democratic Attorney General Josh Kaul to criminally charge Wisconsin's Republican electors, like in Michigan.
Obviously, this is an enormously important event, not only in our criminal justice system, but in American history. The former president has been indicted in connection with the incidents that took place on January 6th. As I said on that day, anybody who was involved in the attempt to commit crimes to overthrow the American government needs to be held accountable. Now, of course, Donald Trump, like anybody else charged with a crime, is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. But today's announcement of the indictment is a monumental step towards getting justice.
What does this mean for any potential state investigation into Wisconsin's Republican electors?
Again, we're not going to comment on any investigation or confirm or deny the existence of any investigation. But what I can tell you is that with any case, what we do at the Wisconsin Department of Justice is consider the facts and the law and what strategy may be most effective in pursuing a case. And we ensure that we are administering justice impartially. That's true of this matter, just like any other one.
You said before, Attorney General, the federal investigation may impact how you move. We've now seen an indictment. What changes, if anything, from your perspective?
Well, again, we remain focused on following developments as they happen, and we're going to make decisions based on our best judgment about what the law provides, what the facts show, and what's in the best interest. Today's indictment, again, is a hugely significant event. Donald Trump is alleged to be ultimately the leader of this conspiracy to try to overthrow the results of an election and steal the seat of government, the presidency, in the most powerful nation in the history of the country, in the history of the world. That is of a monumental significance. What happens based on developments in the case, based on information that is provided as we move forward, remains to be seen, so can't comment further at this point.
Let's bring in Congressman Brian Stile. Congressman, like always, hey, good to see you.
Thanks for having me on.
A lot to get to that's unfolded in this past week, and we're going to cover it all. Let's first start with former President Donald Trump facing that new indictment. It focuses a lot on this fake electors plan, including here in Wisconsin. Wisconsin, of course, named in the indictment. I'm curious, do you think Wisconsin's electors were tricked, as the indictment indicates, in some places by Trump and his campaign as part of this larger effort?
This is the third indictment of President Trump, and this will play out in the courts. The American people will get the full answer for it. I can tell you I did 3 town halls yesterday across southeast Wisconsin. I only got one question on this. The dominant issue facing people here in Wisconsin is the economy, the fact that prices are 17% higher than they were just a year ago. The president's case will play out. But ultimately, I think we need to focus in on the future of the country.
What do you make of what's in this indictment and the Wisconsin connections and the Wisconsin mentions?
I think at the end of the day, this will play out in court. I think the president will come forward with his side of the story. But I think really what's implicating here is the fact that this is a big distraction from the fact that we have so much going on in this country. People are falling further behind, can't afford the things that their families need. And instead, we have a lot of distraction and a lot of questions that are coming out from it.
Given this latest indictment and what prosecutors are alleging in this indictment, will you support Donald Trump if he is the Republican nominee for president?
We got a long ways to go until the Republican convention in Milwaukee next summer, but I do plan to support the eventual Republican nominee.
Yeah, the first debate is here in Milwaukee later this month. Do you plan on being there?
Yeah, I plan to attend the debate. I think hopefully it'll be a great conversation about the direction that we need to take our country in the future. We spent a lot of time talking about where we've been in the past, but the real challenge is how do we get ourselves out of the economic situation that we're in, where families can't afford the things they need. I think you're going to see a lot of good, strong ideas put forward in Milwaukee in just a few weeks.
Do you want to see Trump on that stage as you listen to the candidates?
I think we're best served with more people on the stage than less. I hope he ultimately attends, and ultimately all the candidates are talking about what we need to do to move our country forward.
As the former president was in court, in federal court in D.C., Vice President Kamala Harris here in Wisconsin, several stops, including in your district. The administration is out touting the infrastructure law, the vice president talking about expanding broadband across Wisconsin and the country. Are these not good investments that the administration is out touting?
At the start of the Biden administration, they spent $6 trillion in new spending. In these plans, sure, there's some good things in these plans, but the challenge is what is the real world implications of spending that much money that fast? It's inflation. And the fact that prices are up 17% since President Biden took office and wages haven't kept up is the real lining here. American families are falling further behind because of the policies of the Biden administration.
We're now approaching nearly 3 weeks since Travis King, Wisconsin, a soldier from your district, crossed into North Korea from South Korea. Is there anything that Congress is doing in terms of this investigation right now?
I've helped some of the members of his family connect into government agencies. Obviously, we'd like to see all American soldiers return home. The circumstances of this gentleman going into North Korea requires a little bit of investigation, but I'm hopeful that at the end of the day, he'll be able to return home and be reunited with his family.
Congressman, you mentioned your interaction with the family. Have you had communication with them? They have mentioned they've reached out to members of Congress, to the White House, to defense officials, looking obviously for as much information as they can receive.
Yeah, I've acted mostly as a liaison between the family and connecting them with the appropriate government agencies, in particular the Department of Defense and the Department of State. I don't have more information than those agencies have. I've just worked as a liaison to make sure that those family members are connected with the appropriate government official.
This past week, Congressman Mark Pocan asked you to release some video involving Congressman Van Orden from Wisconsin. He's reported to have berated a group of Senate pages in the rotunda. I'm curious, are you going to release that video? Is that something you're looking to do?
This tape involves minors who are employees of the U.S. Senate, and so I've reached out to Capitol Police for their advice on this matter. We'll see what their reply is, and we'll move forward from there.
Have you talked with Congressman Van Orden about this incident? What do you make of what's been reported?
I haven't had a detailed conversation. I'd refer any questions to Mr. Van Orden.
The U.S. Capitol Police are looking to create a regional outpost here in Milwaukee to address what they say are increased threats against members of Congress. What do you know about that plan, and is this something that's necessary here?
So there are threats not only to members of Congress, their staff, but also members of the public. U.S. Capitol Police wants to have a regional presence, no better place than Wisconsin, as we all know, in the summer. And so the U.S. Capitol Police is looking to be able to bulk up those resources to protect members, their staff, as well as the public. I think it's important that we make sure that we keep everyone safe.
Congressman Brian Stile, chair of the House Administration Committee. Congressman, like always, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, this past week, North Korea responding for the first time to messages about Army Private Second Class Travis King from Wisconsin. U.S. officials say King ran across the DMZ nearly 3 weeks ago. His mom speaking to ABC News.
That's not Travis. Travis would not just go over the border like that. He's the type of kid, he would have wanted to come home. You know, he knew just going across that border is basically just committing suicide.
United Nations officials saying North Korea has only acknowledged King crossed into the country, adding that the incident is currently under investigation.
Up next, the vice president in Wisconsin 2024 front and center. Alex Lasry standing by, taking us inside the private fundraiser.